Good afternoon and welcome to Points of View. It's here where politics isn't a taboo, but a conversation starter. And we are just 45 days away from the American presidential election. And if you're on either of the candidates' email listservs, you can most definitely feel it. With fundraising on their minds, the campaign staff and their celebrity supporters are hitting our inboxes pretty hard. Now, their subject lines are luring, and some of President Obama for America's most infamous lines include, "Go ahead, keep waiting," "You won't believe this," and of course, "Me and my wife have an open table and we have an open seat waiting for you." Romney for president also has some pretty creative taglines, and those include "Ride along" and "This is only the beginning." Now, scrolling beyond the subject line, their emails tend to include updates on polling locations, a ploy for donations, bumper sticker prizes, and of course, a critique of the other side. Now, during our visit to the Democratic National Convention, quite a few members of the public complained about these emails. Many of them called them just plain annoying and inauthentic. And this is pretty interesting because in 2008, these tactics were viewed as innovative campaign strategies that personalized the candidate and targeted voters. For this election, it's actually receiving the delete button. Now, their concerns seem to point to the idea that these emails are too formulaic, where they spotlight a current event and either criticize or hail the current administration's response. In a sense, the news is being reformatted into a campaign statement. And this is troubling to voters because the who, what, when, where, and why are all but left out. Today, we unpack some of the most trending topics within these campaign emails. Stepping beyond the email tagline, we give you a holistic account of international and domestic news. Now, the main topics we'll be discussing today include the Pennsylvania voter ID law, the recent deaths that have happened in Libya, and the recently released Romney tape.
On March 14, 2012, Governor Tom Corbett signed the Pennsylvania Voter Identification Protection Act into law. This act, originally sponsored by State Representative Daryl Metcalfe, requires all citizens in the state of Pennsylvania to display a state-issued, non-expired photo ID when they arrive to vote. Without identification present, the registered voter of Pennsylvania will not be allowed to cast their ballot in the November presidential election. Due to recent controversies within the state and on the national level, the bill was sent back to the state Supreme Courts on Tuesday and will be reevaluated. The partisan implications of this Republican-supported law for the upcoming election include the possibility of widespread disenfranchisement of Pennsylvania voters. Although similar laws have been enacted in other regions, Pennsylvania's status as a battleground state has attracted both media attention and the attention of concerned party leaders. Republicans claim that every citizen will have the chance to receive an ID by the election, and therefore only the unmotivated residents will refrain from acquiring a license and will not be allowed to vote. Further, the people who do not obtain an ID are also those who will not be inclined to cast their vote in the election, and therefore the voter makeup will not deviate significantly. According to PennDOT, however, over 758,000 registered voters, 9.2% of the voting population of Pennsylvania, do not currently possess state-issued photo IDs. The Department of Transportation only has funds to grant 75,000 free identification cards total and has already granted fewer than 10,000. Escalating matters further, 379,000 registered voters do not have the necessary documents to obtain identification. 174,000 of these people voted in the 2008 election and are perhaps not as unmotivated as Republicans claim. If this inability to acquire the proper photo identification persists, the outcome of the election in Pennsylvania could be affected significantly, benefiting the Republican Party. House Majority Leader Mike Turzai said that the law would allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. In order to approve the law, however, the state Supreme Court requires that it not result in disenfranchisement and will continue to assist citizens in acquiring the proper identification. The current upheaval in the Middle East over the controversial Innocence of Muslims video has drawn increased attention to America's pro-democracy stance in the Middle East and has opened up the Obama administration to some criticism for supporting the quote-unquote Arab Spring movements, most notably in Libya and Egypt, where four Americans were killed, including the U.S. ambassador and the American embassy was breached, respectively. On September 11, 2012, the 11th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks that cost thousands of casualties on American soil, the U.S. embassy was breached in Egypt, where protesters burned the American flag and raised up al-Qaeda flags, along with writing graffiti extolling Osama bin Laden. On the same day, in a much more grievous event, in the midst of a protest outside the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya, the American compound was attacked and 4 embassy workers, including the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens, were killed. Although the exact circumstances of how the attack materialized remain unclear, there has been rampant outrage, especially from many conservatives in the U.S. attempting to make political gains for the upcoming elections in November. That the Obama administration bungled security operations on a day where security should have been raised, and more damningly, that the administration has supported a cause in the Middle East that is proving detrimental to American interests. In regards to the first line of criticism, it is still too early to speculate whether or not there was any negligence by the U.S. government in securing assets abroad, much less negligence on the Obama administration specifically. That the Obama administration has compromised American interests by either overtly supporting revolutionary movements in the Middle East or not doing enough to maintain the status quo. The bottom line is that if Obama had chosen to support Hosni Mubarak against the seemingly inevitable tide of revolution, even if he was successful in doing so, it would have fueled anti-American sentiments in the Middle East and would have helped feed the jihadist narrative that Americans want to suppress the Middle Eastern people. In addition, providing support for Mubarak would have run contrary to the stance of the international community and would have likely damaged international relations only more greatly. Unlike in Egypt, where the new leadership has shown some troubling signals to the U.S., the Libyan leadership has been more than appreciative of U.S. support for the revolution and is actively pursuing the perpetrators of the attack on the consulate, with 30 arrested already. Although there is obviously some instability in Libya in the aftermath of a revolution against a long-ruling dictator, the trajectory appears positive overall for relations with the U.S.
Today's political climate, anything that a candidate does or says is fair game. Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican presidential candidate, must have forgotten this rule when he let slip some thoughts recently that were secretly videotaped. In May, Romney was having a dinner with 30 wealthy donors in Florida. At this private meal, he let slip some of his more candid thoughts. Unfortunately for Mitt, this diatribe was being secretly recorded and was released earlier this week by none other than Jimmy Carter's grandson on the liberal website Mother Jones. During his speech, Romney says everything from criticizing talk show hosts to claiming that if he were Hispanic, he would have a better chance of winning the election in November. In one of the more jarring moments of the video, Romney states that the people who are going to vote for President Obama again are those who are reliant on the government and who believe that they're entitled to health care, food, and housing. Further, Romney claims that these people make up 47% of the electorate. And as if this wasn't enough on its own, Romney says that he has no chance of getting these people to vote for him because all they care about is getting governmental aid and that he'll never be able to convince them to take control of their own lives. If Romney believed that he had no chance of converting those 47% of voters before, he definitely will not get them on his side now. After this polarizing video was published, Obama's approval ratings seemed to increase substantially, and he seemed to have the biggest lead in the election that he's had in quite some time. The release of this video then asks whether or not politicians are allowed to have private beliefs that are separate from those that they present publicly. Obviously, Mr. Romney would never have stated these ideas on national television. However, you can be sure that when President Obama is speaking to those who he believes are confidants in a private location, he speaks honestly as well. What makes people so upset by this leaked footage is that they feel betrayed by Romney. They feel as though he is just another politician who is lying to them to get votes. Obviously, this is not going to help his image. However, just because he is the only candidate who had a video of this kind leaked does not mean that he is the only candidate who speaks candidly with those close to him. Moving forward, it's 100% important to take Romney's comments into account when voting. But it's always more important to keep this scandal in mind as a reminder that everything that politicians say should be taken with a grain of salt.